Today's episode is brought to you by Scientist.com, the life science industry's leading R&D orchestration platform. Scientist.com gives researchers instant access to thousands of pre-vetted suppliers, saving time, reducing costs, and accelerating innovation.
Hi, I'm John Gagliano, Senior Director of Biopharm Catalyst.
Hello, I'm Sheff, known as Sheff Station, a 20-year vet in trading biotech stocks.
And this is Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. Biopharm Catalyst is not a registered investment advisory firm, and the views on this podcast are not intended to be financial advice. Guests on this podcast may hold the stocks discussed in personal or other investment accounts. This content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you're joining us and where you're joining us from. Welcome to another episode of Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. Today is January 20th, 2026, and we're really excited to be joined for the first podcast episode of the year with Sheff. Couldn't come at a better time. Obviously, we had the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, the largest healthcare conference in the world, and later last week. So definitely wanted to touch on some of the key takeaways from that. I'm sure that most folks on the call have read various recaps. Maybe some of you even attended the conference itself. So really, I think we want to talk a little bit about, how this conference is going to shape the landscape for the rest of the year, specifically for biotech investors, and hopefully provide you guys with a little bit more context as it relates to that specifically. As I feel like that is probably going to be the context that is most relevant for folks listening on the call here. So, Sheff, welcome back. Happy New Year. I hope you had a great end of year and excited to have you on again.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to be back. I mean, it's amazing. It's a whirlwind already in the first part of the year. We've had a couple of buyouts we'll touch upon, and one more week till February, but the year's going by fast. I'm excited about what's to come in biotech, and what's going to be the pressing issues moving forward in terms of continuing the growth stage that we started last year and ended strong, and now we're into 2026. So it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just out of curiosity, did you attend the conference?
I did not attend JP Morgan this year, healthcare conference. I was able to listen in on a lot of different conferences, which I felt like I got quite a bit out of those conferences because, when you're at the conference, it's so big that you're just running around and you're trying to catch bits and pieces. But if you can focus in and get a schedule, then you can hear a conference every hour. And it especially these bigger biotech companies that are on the breakthrough of getting bought out or what have you.
It's a really good point. I mean, some of these conferences, and I don't know, some folks may, like I said, may have gone, or some folks have not been to a conference like that. They're just so big that, to your point, sometimes it's more helpful to be a little bit more focused and have, all the sessions that ahead of time to be able to look through them and say, hey, I'm going to join this one virtually, et cetera. So, so that's really cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, just kind of for starters, obviously we did this podcast. I think we did a webinar last year, not a podcast, but just for starters, we started off last year's discussion with a fair amount of optimism coming out of JP Morgan going into 2025. And that was, the year started off pretty strong, and then it was quickly met with some headwinds. Then we saw the second half of the year pick up with several deals over $10 billion. And so we're really looking to hang on to that momentum as we go into 2026. So hopefully that's something that, we're going to see in the biotech industry, and we're going to hang on to some of that momentum that we saw in second half of the year last year. But I guess just as a whole, Sheff, what were what were your key takeaways from the conference as a whole? And, more specifically, I know you want to talk about some of the bigger deals. If you want to touch on some of the deals and some of the partnership opportunities that you're most excited about, that would be great.
Yeah, one of them was watching one of the big boys in Eli Lilly acquiring Ventyx Biosciences for 1.2
Yep.
billion or $14 a share in cash. And, basically, I mean, they were looking to strengthen their ability to deliver these advances across many different areas like cardiometabolic health, neurodegeneration, autoimmunity. Those were some of the areas that Eli Lilly is continually looking to grow in, as well as some of the other big pharmas. What I heard a lot from the JP Morgan conference was, really focusing in on oncology, metabolism, with the GLP-1s, the immunology, neurology, those are specific areas, principal areas of strategic interest, which aligns well with a lot of the focal points that these bigger companies had touched upon and looked at last year. So it's going to be interesting to see. So that was the first one, and then we just had Wrap Therapeutics, which soared, because they just got bought out by GlaxoSmithKline
Mhm.
Beecham, or not Beecham, but GlaxoSmithKline. Um, and Wrap Therapeutics develops treatments for patients with inflammatory and immunologic diseases. So, they got bought at $58 a share in cash. Again, one of those big mega buys that you talked about. I mean, it was a 2.2 billion. It's expected to close in the first quarter. Um, it includes the acquisition includes or your Zebrapart, which is a treatment that targets and neutralizes um, immunoglobulin E, which is the immune system antibody that triggers allergic responses. So it again is one of those areas that I talked about in terms of oncology and metabolism, immunology and neurology that focused on immunology. So they're already going after, companies that are in the specific interests here, that we're talking about. And the other thing that you said in the beginning of as soon as we started this podcast was AI. Eli Lilly. Was it Eli Lilly? I
Yes,
believe it was. It
with
wasn't
NVIDIA. Yeah.
with
Yeah.
NVIDIA. Significant,
Yeah.
significant. And my good friend, Brad Longcar has this biotech TV, and he had talked about AI and biotech and how it's going to be growing significantly in 2026. I think companies are finding ways to grow their pipelines via AI and bringing products to the market a lot faster, especially with the new chief that we had last year. And I just forgot his name; it just escaped me. He's very enthusiastic about a lot of the technology that we have that's going to continue to grow the biotech platform that we have. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the scale of that is something that we, have been talking about for a little while now with respect to AI, right? We're talking about, Nvidia, one of the by market cap, obviously one of the largest companies out there, period, right? And clearly the leader right now on the AI front, right? And so to see that really come into to see that partnership on take place and see how it's going to unfold, I think is really powerful for the industry. And I think we're at a point now where it's sort of like it's no longer about if AI is going to be used. It's really going to be how can this really change the game, for particularly for drug discovery, right? I think that's a lot of what we're discussing with AI and how that's going to change the game. And I think we're going to see a lot more with respect to that throughout the year and years to come. The other thing that people have to, I think, keep in mind with respect to AI is is that its growth is by nature is exponential, right? Like you're talking about something that is continuously learning and learning. So this isn't linear, right? Like with each
Yeah,
passing moment and
exactly.
it's getting faster and faster and faster and catching speed quicker and quicker. And so
Exactly.
sometimes that's going to lead to some of these developments happening a lot sooner than people might even anticipate, because
Correct.
of sort of that exponential growth that you have with the technology. So
Absolutely. And, we're seeing that too, that it's a lot easier to incorporate with a specific product that is incorporated into the growth rather than the mainstream of a big company. Because obviously, putting AI into every single product platform within a Pfizer is going to take forever. But
Mhm.
if they were able to, acquire a product, it's easier to start there and then grow using that product. So they also talked about, how do you do that with a company that's big that, where you're able to incorporate AI over the broad, landscape of that company versus a smaller company that since their inception they've been using AI and they've been able to just continually, pump out different products. It's a different way of doing business, and I think the ability to bring the product to market sooner is going to be, the turning point, especially in 2026, because as they had talked about, there was some small, milestones that were happening with AI in biotech, but this year those milestones they're going to grow leaps and bounds, and it's going to be a game changer.
Mhm. Absolutely. One other thing I want to touch on is something that we've talked about, or I've talked about on several other podcasts that, obviously keeps on coming up is just, China's role, right? China is responsible for 33% of medical innovations, or I should say 33% of medical innovations are sourced out of China at this point, and that number
Mhm.
has grown over the years. So they're definitely here to stay. I mean, how do you think China factors into biotech's future? And I mean, I know that you are mainly a US investor, right? But do you have
Yeah.
any, like, how do you factor in sort of some of that foreign influence that we're seeing from a country like that's growing pretty rapidly in the space?
Well, I think we're starting to see it where those companies are partnering with big pharma, with specific products. I think, I know 5 years ago when the first biotech index was started, it was the cancer immunotherapy index. It focused specifically on U.S. companies, and then within 6 months there was a second one that's focused specifically on China because, as you spoke of, the growth. You can't focus on one area of the world without focusing on one that's the fastest growing segment. And China is definitely here to stay. Um, I think that we're seeing their techniques and what they're doing to grow product development being used by big pharma. But I think it's complementary. I don't think they're doing it by themselves. I think they're needing U.S. companies, to grow their platforms, and I think that's what we're seeing. That's why I think it's going to continue to get bigger, but I think over that past decade when we thought it was just going to take off by itself, we saw that it didn't
Yeah.
because a lot of the US companies were not adapting to that transformation as they are now. And I think that flexibility along with AI is going to help grow the partnerships between China and the US, and we're going to continue to grow even stronger.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. Um, and certainly something that we'll be paying attention to. Um, any other key takeaways from the conference from you, Chef? Obviously we're going to talk about how all of this impacts Catalyst, which is what a lot of our viewers and our listeners want to hear about. But any other major takeaways before we jump over to the Catalyst segment?
Yeah, I just think as you were talking that about as well, I just think that what the conference specifically focused on is areas of growth. So not just a lot of times you get to the conference and people are looking for M&A. Oh, what company is going to get bought? What's going to happen? I mean, the two deals that we just talked about, one happened on January 7th before JP Morgan, and this Rap Therapeutics just happened, once JP Morgan concluded. So I think there was thought that there would be more,
Mhm.
but I think it's going to be something, and even they talked about this at the conference, that is going to evolve throughout the year.
Yeah.
It's not going to be front loaded where everyone says, "Oh, there's going to be all these buyouts in the first quarter," and then we don't see anything the remainder of the year. I think continuing on that theme of what's the goal of these big pharma companies in buying these smaller companies. It's not just a product; it's a disease state that, they see tremendous potential. And again, going back to those areas, that we talked about are significant in terms of immunology, metabolism, neurology, and oncology. Those are the big four. And so they honed in on that pretty significantly. And I think the two buyouts that we've seen over the past 2 weeks is just getting started, I think, for what we're going to see for the remainder of 2026.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, appreciate your thoughts on that, Sheff. If you find the information that Sheff is presenting on this podcast useful and would like to gain more insights into his trading strategy for individual tickers, you can donate to this charity, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes, and all individuals donating $300 or more get full access to his VIP private X account. Founded in 2007, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes is a national leader dedicated to improving the quality of life for children, youth, and adults through participation in sports and physical activity in communities across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. NWABA's programs focus on helping people who are blind build confidence, gain self-esteem, develop friendships, and reach their greatest potential. You can donate by clicking on the link at the bottom of our podcast page, www.biofarmcatalyst.com/podcast, or via the link in the YouTube video description. So let's jump over to some of the catalysts. Obviously, JP Morgan is a conference where a lot of discussion just around, kind of setting the stage for, obviously for the catalysts to come and what folks have in their pipeline takes place. Would love to hear your thoughts on what you're looking at for, the next couple weeks, the next couple months, now that we're a couple weeks into the first month of the year here.
Absolutely. And it's going to be interesting, the things that we're going to see throughout the first quarter are going to be a higher number in terms of, say, PDUFAs. We've already seen a few PDUFA dates that have occurred. We saw one towards the end of the year in 2025 where Outlook Therapeutics, even though they had a accelerated review and they had, a 3-month review, actually 2-month review, versus the traditional 6-month. They needed to supply efficacy data, which they thought was substantial for the FDA, and the FDA made them go back and get another study. And so they ended up with a complete response. And that was a surprise. We've seen a number of surprises. We saw one happen with ATRA recently, where they, the FDA had given them parameters to follow with regards to getting approval, and they they moved the goalposts and said, you know what, we now want this study that they hadn't asked for before. So we're going to continue to see things that are pop up, hopefully less surprises like that. I know Fortress Bio also had a 2-month review, and they got approved on January 14th. Stock did really well. Moving forward, one that is going to be a big PDUFA throughout the year, is in June, is Unicisive, and they've got, they're waiting for PDUFA acceptance. They submitted their paperwork at the end of December, and so they're expecting a PDUFA date in January, and or notice of a PDUFA date in January, because the PDUFA will be in June. So we've seen that play have a nice run. We've seen that go from the mid fours to it's about it got as high as 580 today. And that one is going to be really strong. Obviously, again, the new PDUFA is expected in the first half of 2026. So within 30 days of their submission, which happened in December. So the key with that one, and the reason I like that a lot, there's a lot of institutions involved in that, and they had a Type A meeting with the FDA regarding their complete response in November of last year, and it was basically, that there was a manufacturing deficiency, and the manufacturer that they worked with, the FDA told them that rather than getting a new manufacturer to work with, they just had to bring that manufacturer up to speed, which they did. Their facility was inspected, passed the inspection, so that is going to be one that is just going to be a nice run-up play. I think there's, because they had one deficiency in one question that the FDA had, and they've addressed that. It's just a matter of what that does throughout the remainder of the year. So the news that comes out over the next few days will be that they have a PDUFA date, and that could move the stock a buck or two. So we'll see on that. But I really like UNCY, and I think for me that's a long-term play. It's one where I'm going to have shares and I'm going to trade in and out, but I've also taken a solid position because in this phosphatemia space, it's a significant space, billions of dollar industry, and so we'll see what happens there. But UNCY is one to keep an eye on. Next one we talked about. I like IND plays and fibrobiologics, FBLG. They've got an IND. They submitted IND paperwork on December 30th, and so they should hear back whether their IND got accepted. And they submitted IND for psoriasis. So they're looking at INDs for different conditions, but they want to be able to start their study in February and then have data in mid 2026. But usually what we've seen is that INDs are easier to get through and get approved easier than a PDUFA plays. And in small biotech companies, it can move a stock significantly. So Fibrobiologics has, their 32-cent stock traded on NASDAQ. They've got BlackRock, Vanguard Group, State Street, Cascade Financial. They've got some good institutions in that play. But, I will tell you, because it is a small cap, they do need cash. And so, I think that if they do get approved, their IND gets approved, which I believe it will here in the week, then they'll have the opportunity to raise money. But if you're a trader, if it's a 30-cent stock goes to 50 cents off that news, INDs are the way to go. So we've talked about that in the past. I like INDs because minimal risk and higher reward. So that's FBLG.
Yeah, and INDs. Yeah, sorry,
Oh, no.
INDs are something that we actually didn't used to track a long time ago at Biopharm Catalyst, and we started tracking them for that very reason. Is we did notice that, to your point, for some of the very smaller cap type companies, it can make a huge difference, right? And we didn't used to think of it, as a catalyst, but it definitely is a catalyst depending on the size of the company. And so we do track it now on the site, and I think it's a good point. It's not something to be overlooked for sure.
Yeah, and that's a great point. We're seeing more and more of them, and particularly with smaller cap companies, because the larger cap companies already have more established products and they have a higher market cap. So it's not going to move the market or to move the stock as much as an IND where a company is establishing a platform or establishing a disease entity space, and that IND is central to them moving their clinical trials forward. So we're seeing that with companies like Fibrobiologics, FBLG. We're going to see it with GT Biopharma, which is GTBP. They announced an IND submission for their GTB 5550, they're expecting that, and they did that on January 15th. So of course, within 30 days. It's February 15th. They've got, $30 million in cash. Getting an IND for that is going to significantly accelerate their programs and the partnerships that they have. Small market cap company of about 30 million. They have $7 million in cash, $7 to $10 million in cash. They burn cash pretty slow, but that's pretty low for a biotech company, but it's 74 cents. So again, they're expecting an IND acceptance on February 15th. So that's 2 weeks after Fibrobiologics, where they're expecting theirs on January 30th. So, that will be something to watch. There's a PDUFA play within the first quarter. Aldera Therapeutics, ticker symbol ALDX. They had a PDUFA date that was scheduled in December 16th. And the FDA said, hey, you know what? We're going to do an extension, give you a three month extension because we are requiring some additional data. Well, one of the things that we've seen over the years is that anytime the FDA comes back to you for an extension, they believe it's something that can be handled within a short period of time. And the high acceptance rate is greater than 90% when a company gets an extension. Because otherwise, the FDA, and we've seen it before, John, they'll just they'll give a company a complete response letter because they realize that within the time frame that they have, the company is not going to be able to complete the necessary paperwork to get the product approved. Oftentimes, that crushes the stock significantly. So, ALDX, it's close. I think it's close to $5 a share right now, but that's one that I'll be trading and owning into that PDUFA for that reason. Um, Palisade Biotherapeutics is one. Palisade Bio. Um, it's it's heavily owned by institutions significantly, and they've got phase 1B data in fibrostenotic Crohn's disease in the first quarter. Um, every year, Twitter does this thing where they say, "Hey, we're going to look at the most looked at biotech stocks and see." What kind of action that people expect. And Palisade was one of the highest ranked in terms of companies that are being followed because they have such a high institutional ownership and they're dealing in serious disease space where, if they have a successful clinical trial, like a phase 1B, the stock is going to move significantly. And obviously at $1, and I think today it was up 14 cents. It was $1.80. It's significantly undervalued.
Yeah.
I know Piper Sandler had said it's a great name to own ahead of their, data in Q1. The shares are undervalued considering that the PDE4 inhibition is already validated in inflammatory bowel disease. And so, Pally 2108 has already shown significant benefits across clinical remission and response in a small phase 1B ulcerative colitis trial. So going along the fact that it's in a PDE4 that mechanism of action has been validated, I think gives people, enthusiasm that their data will be good. So that's in the first quarter. Again, it's $1.70. It's heavily owned, and it's one that I own, and I really like the data moving forward. One that is off people's radar, but it's highly followed by Adar Capital Management, which is Daniel Steenberger. He's a biotech guru who has a significant fund. I followed Adar for a long time. Typically doesn't invest in the really small cap, but QNCX is one. They've got phase 3 data that's going to be in February, so it's definitely a binary play. But the thing I like about this NEAT study is that they have a platform. So they have a platform for encapsulated dexamethasone sodium phosphate, or Aradex, which leverages their AID, which is their autologous intracellular drug encapsulation technology platform that can not. And so anytime kids have have these diseases and they need dexamethasone, oftentimes it's given in large doses. But with this drug device that they have, they can give it in small doses, and it's been shown to be effective for a number of years. So they're saying this is not just a medication that would work in ataxia, galactasia, which is what they're looking at. It could be used in all different kinds of of administration of medicine. So the thing I like about it, and I'll get back to that, is that the NEAT study is being conducted under special protocol assessment, which is, for those that don't know, special protocol assessment is when a company meets with the FDA and the FDA signs off and agrees to specific protocols within the study, that if the FDA says, if you follow what we've told you and your trial is successful, that you have a significant, chance of getting it approved. Which is what Outlook Therapeutics didn't do, which I told you, and with their PDUFA in the end of 2025, when the FDA had said you need to do a third study, and they brought back data from a second study and said this should be good enough. If the FDA says you need a study, you need to do a study, and so they got a complete response. So the two things that are really important to know: data's in February. 100% of the patients that completed the NEAT study have elected to move to an open label study, which means those patients, all of them, tolerated that extremely well. So I had listened to a conference that was conducted by the Citizens Group, which is it's an institution. It's basically an analyst. It's a group that, and they cover them, and they had asked the CEO what he thought his chances of were having a positive phase 3 study, and he said 85%. Which for a CEO to say that, I mean,
Yeah.
that's really, he said in this space it's typically 65%. I would put ours between 85 and 90%.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a big time forward-looking statement that most companies will not do unless they're
Definitely.
extremely competent. So when I saw ADAR management take, ownership, when I saw, some of the other institutions look into that, I thought, okay, this will be interesting. So they have data in February. So they said the middle of first quarter, and then then the CEO basically said, hey, we've got data in February. So if people are playing it as a trade, it's again, a week ago was at 270. It's today it got to 350, 360. Over the next week or so, it could go over to 4. Again, it's a small company doing one single pivotal trial. The readout is the biggest inflection point for Kint's Pharma, and if the data is great, they're off to the races and they can advance their EDSP for review from the FDA and expand their pipeline to add additional indications just based off their drug device combo. So that's one to look at. I really like that one a lot, and I own that, and I'm going to hold through data. And some people may not, and that's fine. But I just want to let everyone know what I'm doing. The Processa is another one that I'm following. Company with extremely small market cap of 9 million. They just completed enrollment of the 20th patient in getting ready for their formal interim analysis in phase 2 for their it's called the NGC, the cat breast cancer study. And basically what they're doing is they're taking a well-known agent like capecitabine that's been used in breast cancer, and they're reducing they're changing the formulation so there's a significantly less incidence of hand-foot toxicity. And and that's the number one toxicity. It's literally 70 to 80% of all the women that have metastatic breast cancer who take capecitabine, which is an oral therapy, easier than getting an infusion and having to go to the hospital. They can take it in their home, but most people have that hand-foot toxicity, and so they can't hold a cold beverage. They their feet are burning, their fingers have a sensation, they're burning, and so this has shown to reduce the toxicities by 70 to 75%. And so it'll be interesting to see. They have data at the end of the first quarter. So again, it's stocks around 320, 325. You got 6 million shares in the float, 10 million shares outstanding. Very small cap company. But if someone's playing it for the run, it's important to know that the data the CEO has specifically stated it's the end of Q1. But they're setting it up nicely because I'll tell you this: they just finished their 20th patient where they enrolled. Well, in December, they said that they had completed 16 of 19 patients, and all those patients tolerated that extremely well. And there were signs of efficacy. And so then, 3 weeks later, they said, hey, we finished our 20th patient. So I think they're trending towards having good data. And the company is a small company. The founder is the chief medical officer, Andy Young. So they have data at the end of Q1. I like that one. Neurosense has Alzheimer's and clinical biomarker outcomes data in the first quarter. They haven't specified when specifically. They just said first quarter, but the thing I like about this study is it's a phase 2 proof of concept study. It's double blind, placebo controlled, so there is more risk versus an open label study where they know what the patients are getting. But it's an exploratory proof of concept study. Clinical outcome measures are descriptive by design, and they're going to analyze clinical observations alongside biomarker data that enables comprehensive interpretation of these clinical observations. first quarter. It's a very low float company. The company is, I think it's stock price is 78, 79 cents. I guarantee you, though, I'm confident based on the small market cap and the small float that if the company does well in this proof of concept study, and meets their markers, which there aren't really stiff, strong markers in terms of
Yep.
clinical significant, it could increase the market cap significantly. So that's Neurosense. Ticker symbol is NRSN. Next one is Compass Therapeutics. Piper Jaffray has a $12 price target on that. It's one of their top picks for 2026, Piper Jaffray, because their companion trial for Compass Therapeutics, their companion 002 trial is going to have data on progression-free survival and overall survival efficacy endpoints in late Q1 of 2026. So they're saying, the second to last week in March. So if someone were playing that as a run, as a catalyst move, understand that the CEO is guided. It's the end of Q1. And if the data is positive, obviously that's going to drive shares. But the expectation is that the trial is going to achieve this progression-free survival endpoint, which assumes a hazard ratio of 0.65, and then the trial will also report on OS, which needs to achieve an HR 0.65, a hazard ratio of 0.65, statistical significance close to achieve statistical significance. So something to keep in mind. Again, that's not one that I own. If I were to own it, I would not hold it through the end of March. I would just play the run on that. A smaller cap one, which is 30 cents. And, John, you and I talked about the some of these rare disease companies, but the company's called Azitra, and the ticker symbol is AZTR. And they have data in the phase 1 data, which I like. Phase 1 data in Netherton syndrome, a rare condition in kids, and there's no approved therapy from the FDA. There's only one other company that's working on a product for Netherton. It's called the ticker symbol on that is QNRX, and it's called Quinox. They're further along because they're doing phase 2 studies, whereas Azitra is doing phase 1. But again, the company's 30 cents. Company's already done a reverse split. So the company just did that last year. And they have a compliance plan from the NYSE, the Amex, basically, that they need to regain listing standards by April 1st of 2027. They've got another year to do that. And so I think some of the times people worry about companies that are 30 cents that for them to maintain their stock standing, either they need to redo a reverse split or they need to be $1 a share. Well, Azitra needs to, but in April of 2027. So that gives them time to have good data and to work on increasing shareholder value for their shareholders. And so, again, end of Q1, data in Netherton syndrome, and then they have data in mid 2026, which is June. At ASCO, they're going to be presenting on EGFR toxicity reduction. They've got, with EGFRs like cetuximab and stuff, the hand-foot toxicity I just talked about is prevalent. Well, they have a drug that reduces those toxicities, and they're going to choose ASCO to release data. So that'll be in June. So there's 2 catalyst points, but for what we're talking about here, the first one at the end of Q1 2026 is in Netherton syndrome. So stock's 30 cents right now. I really like that company. I like the CEO. They, straightforward. He's dealing in the rare disease space, but obviously the company needs to have some good data to get out of that the basement price where they are right now. One that we've seen get up towards $6, and they're expecting data that I'm expecting to be positive, and I have owned shares of it. It's called PepGen. They have data, first quarter data, MAD data, multiple ascending dose data from their Freedom 2 study. It's a randomized placebo-controlled trial. And they had data in October in their SAD study, which they showed that they hit their markers and the stock did really well. At the time when we talked about that in October, the stock was $1 and it shot up to $7 within 3 weeks, pulled back, got around $4, and now in anticipation of this multiple ascending dose, the MAD data, they did well in their SAD data, their single ascending dose study. I think with this data in the first quarter, they've got $74 million in cash, and they're talking about potentially being a buyout candidate by a company, a larger company. But I'm expecting positive data there. So that's PepGen, ticker symbol PEPG. TVTX. So that is Travere Therapeutics. So this is another one where we were expecting a PDUFA on January 13th for their rare genetic indication for FSGS, and the FDA said, "Hey, you know what? We're going to give you guys a 3-month extension. We just need additional data from you, which we know you have, and we expect that back, and we'll give you a 3-month extension." So that is a best idea from Guggenheim. It's one of their top plays. Obviously the company fell on that news. It's around $27 a share. They've got a $50 price target on it. So if someone were trading that, and they didn't want to hold through data, well, they have 3 months because they got an extension. And again, it goes back to what we talked about. We saw ALDX get an extension. We saw TVTX get an extension. And John, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing as well, but it seems to me that this FDA is more flexible and they're less likely to just hand out CRLs unless companies just aren't obliging with what they're doing.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah. So that's where we are with TVTX. I really like that one. And while we're on PDUFAs, I talked about one last year that I was anticipating was going to have, a PDUFA upcoming, which they do. But it's AQST, Aquestive Therapeutics. Now, if you guys remember, Aquestive Therapeutics, the FDA told them in November that they did not need an AdCom for their sub-Q. Oh gosh, what's the medicine? I just forgot. But it was sub-Q therapy. They basically said, we don't need any, we don't need an AdCom. You guys should be good to go. But then recently, like 2 weeks ago, the FDA sent out a notice to them, and they let their shareholders know that the FDA said there were deficiencies in their application. So the stock it took a hit from like $6.50 down to $4 because it wasn't clear on what those deficiencies were. If it was an extension, we would have confidence like we do with TVTX or like we do with ALDX that they could make their PDUFA date. But 2 weeks away from a PDUFA date, which is January 31st, and the company is telling the shareholders that they have deficiencies, leads one to believe that they're not going to get approved in time. I was in that stock, took a little hit on that, disclaimer, full disclosure, because that came out of nowhere. Again, that was one of those that you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
So, people, I'm not in AQST. I won't be in AQST until I know what the deficiencies are and I know what the timeline will be around it. But with the PDUFA 2 weeks away, I don't see how the company can get their information to the FDA soon enough. So they'll probably end up with a CRL. GOS, Gossamer Bio, they've got data in February, and this is a massive event for the company. The problem is that what we saw toward the end of 2025, it was one of the biggest gainers in 2025, but it could have been a bigger gainer if it hadn't dropped, for a record 14 straight days, where it dropped from the $4 area to as low as $2.40, $2.50, where it's continued to reside. So, as a trader, you feel like it's had its run, it's had its gain because it went from $1 in last summer of 2025 in July to $4 in December. And then in mid-December, toward the end of the year, you kind of traders might have thought, hey, there's some tax selling going on. Maybe I'll get back in. But then you go from 430, 440 down to 250, and you've continued to stay there. You wonder if there's a bit of a leak or if it counts out of the bag, that the data might not be as good. So I'm not in that one. I've steered clear of it, and so that's one though that people have questions on. And again, they have top line readout of seralutinib for PAH, and so Oppenheimer, it's one of their biggest movers in the rare disease space. They like it. They think they're going to show statistical significant improvement in their 6-month data. It's one of their top picks, but again, because it's a binary event, and we're seeing this action in the stock, I'm staying away from it. Rocket, RCKT, they have a PDUFA date in March 28th. And so, that's one to watch and to look at. CTMX, I like CTMX. Lot of institutions in it. They've got Varceta, which is monotherapy dose expansion study in late line CRC or colorectal cancer. And their expansion data that they had in 2025, they had 100 patients enrolled, and so we're waiting to hear on that data. I really like that one because I like the institutions that are involved in it, and there's a lot of them. And so, Perceptive, ADAR, there's a lot of big ones in there. So, I don't know, small position, again, I know they have data toward the end of the year, so I'm watching them closely. Not sure if I'm going to hold through. And then I've got a couple more, and then, Sky Pharma. They're in the GLP-1 space. Sky is 99 cents right now. And they've got phase 2A 26-week extension data update and interim results in Q1. Now, remember in 2025 they had data where they didn't meet their statistical significance and the stock got absolutely hammered. But now they're saying that even though they didn't meet statistical significance with their primary, they showed benefit in the secondary endpoint with GLP-1. So we're going to see what happens moving forward with this extension data. Maybe the tide turns for the company. They have a drug called nimacimab, which is a potential first-in-class. It's a monoclonal antibody inhibitor of the CB1 receptor. And so, we're going to see how they end up doing.
Sorry, guys, on the line, we had a little bit of a internet connection issue there for a second, but that was actually the last catalyst I think that Sheff was going to talk about, if I'm not mistaken, right, Sheff?
Absolutely. I finished with Sky, and then Guts. They've got a remain study with a GLP-1 at the end of January. So that is a big one. I own that one and really like that one. But that's the list. That's the last one.
Okay, great, awesome. Well, again, as always, man, thank you so much for running us through your list. Obviously, a ton of information as usual, and a lot of catalysts and a lot of companies and drugs to pay attention to in the coming weeks, particularly around the PDUFA and the IND space, as we spoke about. And definitely for everyone, Sheff, you mentioned about institutional investing. Make sure you stay on top of what some of these big institutions are doing, because what the big money is doing is fairly indicative of what smaller retail investors should be doing as well. So just something to keep in mind. But Sheff, thank you so much, man. As usual, appreciate it so much, and glad to be back in this new year, and really excited for what's to come in the next couple weeks and the next couple months here. And for those on the line listening or on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, share with your friends and colleagues, and comment on what you want to hear more of, or if there's any questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible, and we do respond and take a look at all of the comments and the questions that we get. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we will be back again next month to discuss more catalysts in the month of February. And Sheff, thanks again, man.
Hey, thank you, John. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone for listening.
Absolutely. Have a good one, guys. Take care.